Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step out the door and deliver an episode to you while I walk the dog. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It's a lovely day here in suburban Chicago. The sun is out and it's Father's Day. My birthday was recently and I'm now 47 years old, so if I sound crusty and old and wizened, it's because I've now passed from 46 into 47, so take that for what it's worth. We had a nice birthday. We looked at some birds, played a nice fun game of Ark Nova with my wife and son, and had a good nap. It was a lovely birthday. I also got the Honey Buzz expansion, which I backed on Kickstarter a very long time ago and was happy to see that show up, so that's fun. I didn't know it was coming either, so what a delight. Okay, well, if I might have my count wrong because I may be one episode behind, but I think that I've caught up to my backlog, and that means this episode is going out soon, and I believe it's episode 629. And it turns out about once a month I'm doing one of these episodes, or not, whatever. So for this episode, I'm going to be talking about movies I saw recently. That's right, it's time for our next movie roundup. If you're not interested in any of my movie commentary content, this would be an episode to skip, but I hope you'll stick around. What I like to do in the movie roundup episodes is that I will talk about movies I've seen recently, talk a little bit about what I thought of them, and then generally try to connect a game with the movie so that if you're feeling like doing a movie and game experience, you can do so. So that's kind of the approach that I like to take and what we'll be doing here. So this is my April and May roundup. And I haven't marked which movies were April and which movies are May on my little sheet that I'm using while I'm walking here. But I will have marked that on the show notes page by the time this episode goes live. So if you're curious about when I watched each episode, you can go over to the show notes page. Which, by the way, if you haven't visited our page at rattleboxgames.com, you will find that we have a delightful archive of pages for every episode of this podcast. And on those pages, I have links to the game pages on Board Game Geek that I've talked about. So if I ever say the name of a game and you miss it, you can always go to the show page and look it up. I will also, on episodes like this or the reading roundup, I will put links to my reviews of those things on either Letterboxd for movies or Goodreads for books. I don't write long reviews in most of those places, but generally that's the approach that I take. So if you want to look up anything related to the episode, remember you can always head over to Board Game Geek, you can always head over to Rattlebox Games and look up the page of the show notes. So for April and May, those were two very busy months in my life, and so I did not have a ton of time to watch movies. In fact, I only wrote down recorded six movies that I watched. I guess it's possible that I watched a seventh or even an eighth movie and forgot to record them, but I'm generally pretty dutiful about recording these movies, so I think 6 is probably correct for how many movies I watched in April and May. So I'll just go through them and we'll talk a little bit about each one and what I thought of them. So the first movie I watched is called Damsel. In this movie, we have a fantasy land in which a kingdom that is without many resources and going through a drought sends an envoy to a wealthy country where they propose to have a marriage between their daughter and the prince, and that marriage will result in a huge dowry for the kingdom, which will save the kingdom, but she will end up living with these people. And something goes terribly wrong. I don't really want to reveal too much of the plot because the movie's good, but the plot is the key part. Something goes terribly wrong. It turns out there's a sinister motive for the group that's marrying a thing, and then it becomes an adventure in which the princess has to save herself from various and destructive encounters. The film has a number of really interesting choices. It turns out this is not something that she's the first one this has happened to, and so the kind of record of other people who have gone through this is really interesting. It makes for good storytelling and gives us something to look at while the character is basically by herself. We also have a number of other choices that the other characters make that I think are interesting and effective. There are big parts of the movie that are just really dumb. I like the overall idea of the story, but there's a lot of things in it that don't make sense, or they didn't work for me, or just kind of the way things happen don't really make sense, or take a big leap of faith, or blind eye to logic. So from the sort of narrative construction piece, I did not find this movie as satisfying as I would hope, but it was an interesting story and I enjoyed having watched it. I have fond thoughts of it now rather than, unpleasant thoughts of it. But I would say if this is a sort of genre that you're interested in and you haven't checked out the Joey King movie, I can't remember what that one's called. Might just be The Princess. There's a Joey King movie where she plays a princess whose castle gets taken over and she basically goes around like it's an action movie and she kicks butt. The action scenes in that movie I thought are much better created, and the overall effect I think works better in that one. So if you're going to look for a movie like this, and I would recommend the Joey King movie rather than this one. Although Damsel was an enjoyable time, and I don't think you would suffer for having watched it. Well, that was my take on Damsel. Now, if you're going to watch a movie with that, or you're going to play a game with that, and you want to think about what would you play, I don't know. Legacy of Dragonhold, perhaps. Legacy of Dragonhold is a tabletop sort of RPG-like game that you play with a group of people, and it's got a narrative campaign, and you resolve things. There's not really much dice rolling. You choose to use stats that you have available, and if you run out of those stats, then so good things, good and bad, happen. It's kind of a choose-your-own-adventure style narrative in that there's a book full of different choices, and as things happen in the story, you're going to read different entries, and you keep track of things on paper. It's a really good game and very well made, and has a feminist and queer-friendly ethos that I think fits the ethos of this movie, Damsel. All right, next we showed my daughter Dead Poets Society, which is a movie I haven't watched for a long time. Boy, this movie doesn't even come close to passing the Bechdel test, and there's some stuff in it that is really bad by today's standards. There's a young Josh Charles plays a guy who's fallen head over heels for this cheerleader at the local public school. It's about a bunch of kids at a private school who are sort of learning to explore their passions in a buttoned down and serious world. There are some elements in it that still ring really good, but the overall environment of the story, I think, feels so dated now. It already did when it came out, but feels so dated now that it loses some of its punch in being just set in such an archaic time. The overall narrative arc is good, but I always think also of my film teacher who really didn't like the movie because she thought that the main character had done a moral disservice to there's a central drama in the movie where the teacher gives some advice to the student in a way that is not, that does not succeed and results in some pretty disastrous outcomes. And my mentor in college blamed him. She thought he really made a mistake in how he talked to this kid about what was going on, and that it was significantly his fault what happens. And I don't entirely disagree. That said, it's got some inspiring stuff in it. It reminds us that poetry can be lovely, and some of the elements in the film really work well. So, I mean, if you've never seen Dead Poets Society, I think it's worth checking out. It's got some sort of lyrical and poetic fun ideas, but it probably feels pretty dated by today's standards. On the other hand, you've got Robin Williams playing a very delightful, serious role, which sometimes he doesn't play those as well as I would like. So that is Dead Poets Society. Hard to say what game I would play if I were going to watch Dead Poets Society. I mean, if you wanted to play a game about private school, perhaps Miskatonic School for Girls, you can solve the problem of the School for Boys thing by having the School for Girls. Or I do have the game I still haven't played yet, which is Miskatonic School for Boys. In both those cases, you have a private school as the center story. It doesn't overlap much in terms of the love of poetry. I guess you could do poetry for Neanderthals as well if you wanted a game focused more on the poetics part of it. That's Dead Poets Society. Next up, I watched the movie Wrath of Man. Wrath of Man is a sort of Jason Statham vehicle directed by Guy Ritchie. This came and went. I never heard of it until I came across it on whatever streaming service I watched it on. And I was sort of in the mood for a dumb Jason Statham movie. And I mean, it's not entirely dumb, but it was a reasonably good Jason Statham movie about a security guard for an armored truck company and some people who were causing heists of different groups, including the armored truck company. So the film has a lot of sort of twisty-turny storytelling elements, and it backs up and moves forward. And I don't want to say a lot about those elements. I will say I thought Jason Statham did a pretty good job. I like Guy Ritchie's directing style, and this sort of feels like a good mid-tier example of the kinds of stories he likes to tell. Lots of colorful criminal characters and the world where criminals just kind of run around and do whatever they want, and law enforcement is either entirely absent or is sort of incompetent. Is part of the nature of this kind of story. But if you like, there's some good gunfights and a little bit of fisticuffs and entertaining criminals saying entertaining things. So I don't have a lot more to say about Wrath of Man, except that I enjoyed it. And if you were going to make a movie sort of inspired by this, I might say or if you're going to play a game sort of inspired by this, I might suggest playing Getaway Plan. That's the Vital Lacerda medium-heavy Euro game in which you play a group of people who have committed a heist and are now laying low before you get out of town. You want to take as much money with you as you can with you, but you don't want to be the last one out of town, because the last one out of town is stuck. Although I think it's possible for everyone to make it out of town, and then it's based on how much money you get. But you also might not make it out of town, and then you're definitely not going to win. I liked Getaway Plan when we played it, but I don't remember it in super detail. You can check it out on an earlier episode of Pick Up and Deliver if you want to hear what I had to say about that. So that was Wrath of Man. Next up is Ghostwatch. So I came across Ghostwatch. I was not familiar with this film, but I was talking with a buddy of mine about the movie Midnight with the Devil, which I think looks really interesting and I'm keen to see. It faced a bit of an online backlash because they apparently used AI-generated art in a couple shots in the movie, and some people boycotted the movie because of that. I mean, I feel like we've got some complicated space that we're moving into. I'm not sure I'm willing to boycott the movie because of that, but I haven't seen it yet either, so we'll see what happens. Nonetheless, that movie is sort of about a TV studio where they have some sort of seance or something, and it goes terribly wrong and bad stuff happens. But it's a found footage film, so it's shot, in situ and as though it's real. And I was telling this to a friend. He's like, well, so sort of like Ghostwatch, huh? And I'm like, I don't know what that is. He goes, you haven't seen Ghostwatch? You got to see Ghostwatch. So he loaned me Ghostwatch. This is a made for BBC British movie. It was sort of like an evening feature, kind of like ABC did the Tuesday night movie or whatever. It's sort of in that vein. And the idea is that there's a house where there's a young girl who's sort of possessed, and the BBC is sending a film crew to the house to see what's happening at the house. And the idea is they're going to spend all night and see what happens in this haunted house and explore what happens. And they'll cut back to the studio where they'll talk to people about ghost sightings and that sort of thing. And then there'll be conversations with the family, and if anything happens, they have cameras all over the house and so on. And it sort of, if you can kind of imagine what would happen in a story like that that's based as a simulated found footage story, that's what happens. Now, apparently what made this show particularly compelling is that it's formatted very much like a real BBC special would be, and the people in it are real BBC news presenters. So like the main actor in the show is a guy who's was an actual BBC news presenter. So it would have been like if Anderson Cooper was in a fictional movie that appeared to be a show on CNN. Now, it was presented, I guess, as part of a clearly fictional night of TV, but if you tuned in partway through, it looked pretty real, and it sort of had a War of the Worlds kind of effect in terms of people calling in thinking this was real and wild stuff was happening. So And from that perspective, it's pretty cool. It's very well made. It's a little scary. I mean, I wouldn't call it super scary, but BBC TV production values in the 80s were such that you have to, whatever, it is what it is. But I really did enjoy the movie, and I'm glad to have checked it out. This does beg a question though, what game would you play to go with this kind of story? And there are two, depending on if you're in the mood for something creepy or something pleasant. If you're in the mood for something pleasant, I would say Mysterium. You know, Mysterium is a game about psychics trying to solve a murder by communicating with a ghost. And that ghost is sending messages to the psychics. It fits very well with the theme of Ghostwatch, especially if you're not looking for a game that has sort of scariness or tension. If you're looking for something that's scariness or tension, there is a game called, I think, Hana Oko. I'll put a link in the show notes. I don't remember if that's actually the name, but I'll look it up and find it. And it is a game about a sort of Ring-style haunting, or the Grudge-style haunting, sort of Japanese creepy ghost living in a house and haunting the people who live there kind of game. And it's supposed to be pretty dang creepy. I haven't played it. I've only seen it once or twice, but it is always a game that I've sort of been on the lookout for as a used game. I don't know if I'd want to pay new prices for it, but I certainly would enjoy trying it at some point. And it looks delightfully creepy. So that's Hana Oko, or Hana Okohana, I don't know. Look on the show page for the details and check out Ghostwatch if you think that sounds interesting. I guess I was on a horror kick because the next movie I watched was The Blackening. Now, The Blackening is an interesting film. It is a movie about a group of friends, African-American friends who they rent a house in the country, and they go there and they find a sort of slasher-style serial killer ready to murder them, but it's also a sort of play a game to survive your life kind of murder situation. And the game is all about sort of black history, but framed through really horrific racist stereotypes. But the movie is also very funny, but funny from the perspective of the black characters. It is made by writers and directors from that community, so I guess it has its bona fides. It doesn't feel to this middle-aged white man that it is being offensive or that it is treading ground it shouldn't. It feels like a story told for a community by that community, and in that context it's very funny. That said, I don't know how much I get to say about this movie, right? It's not for me, in the same way that I'm not going to watch a romance movie that's aimed at people who like romance movies and spend a lot of time talking about what I do or don't like about it, because it really isn't for me. I hope that the filmmakers don't mind me watching it and enjoying it. I did, and I think it's great, and you should watch it if you get a chance. It's really pretty good. But it doesn't fit the stereotype, or it doesn't aim for me as an audience, and so I don't really feel comfortable commenting on it. Beyond saying I think it's pretty good and should be worth checking out if you get a chance. Now, if you're in the mood for a serial killer game, I think Last Friday is that's the only one I've played where there is a marauding serial killer going around killing the characters. And I think that one would fit very well. I guess you could also play Final Girl if you're in for a solo game. I was not super into Final Girl, but I only played it one time at a con, so I don't know if I didn't give it enough of a chance or whatever. Because I do like Hostage Negotiator, so you would think I would like Final Girl, but there it is. I haven't had a chance to give that a go again. Nonetheless, I think The Blackening is great, and if you get a chance to watch it, definitely do so. All right, finally, the last movie I want to talk about is ISS. I got this from the library off the Lucky Day shelf. ISS is a science thriller in which you have United States and Soviet astronauts on the International Space Station, and they're there to conduct scientific research, and a nuclear war breaks out down on Earth, and the two groups suddenly find themselves at odds based on Earth-based politics. It's a tense thriller with pretty good acting, not entirely unpredictable plot beats, but reasonably well done. Some of the special effects are not great, but they're probably as good as you can expect for what they are. And man, there was one huge plot hole that I just found so infuriating. And in terms of one of the characters who's out doing a spacewalk out on the outside of the station, and the way that he acts in terms of his own safety is so infuriating that I almost couldn't finish the movie. I was so mad. Other than that, I thought it was pretty great. Pretty good. Not great. It was good. Entertaining if you like a sort of techno thriller, particularly if you want one where you don't have to use a ton of brain cells on it and you can kind of do something else while you're watching. ISS is right up there for you. It's enjoyable and tense at parts, and while the plot beats are relatively predictable, they're not entirely so, and so you can enjoy the narrative surprises at the heart of the movie. And I think you should. In terms of what to watch or what to play while playing ISS, I suppose one game you could play would be, actually, it seems like the game you should play would be, oh no, it's the game I bought. I haven't played it yet, but it's about a station fall, which is about a space station falling back to Earth. So like in ISS and Station Fall, different players have different motivations and different goals in terms of resolving, escaping the station or saving it or whatever. And I think it would probably be a good matchup. Well, thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.